Hello, it's a weekly SIG Node meeting. It's August 15th, 2023. We just entered second half of August, so participation is not that huge. We're doing mostly retrospective today. We have a couple more topics, but I think retrospective for 128 will be the biggest topic for today. So let's get going. Raven, take it over.
Yeah. Thanks, Ricky. So as before, I put together all of the caps that we tracked for 128, and I marked them as merged or not merged. So we have an overview of how many caps we merged, how we're doing, and we have some history data. So first we'll go through all the caps, and then we'll do some retro on what we did well and what didn't go too well. So let's start with the caps. Here is a list of all of the caps. Let's just quickly go through them. We have 31 caps tracked for 128, and out of them we have 16 merged. I have to say that some of the caps are marked as tracked on their cap issue, but I just digged into the comments a little bit to see if they really merged or not. So if I misunderstand the status of any cap, just let me know. I'll go through them. Yeah, the first one, support user namespaces. This is an existing cap is staying in alpha in 128, and this one is merged.
So I think what I would like to add here is we merged the support for volumes, but we missed one piece, which is the pod security policy piece. So we need to continue working with SIGOT to get review on that PR.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. All right, moving on. The next one, support memory QS with SQL v2 is promoting to beta, and it is not merged here. Next one, yeah.
I think we can quickly have a summary of that one. So it didn't work out. So Dikshita, I know you're on the call if you want to briefly summarize what happened there.
Sure. So we won't be able to move ahead with the beta because we found an issue in how we were understanding the usage of memory.high. If we use memory.high, it will actually block the processes forever, and hence we don't want to use it. I'll also go ahead and summarize it in the cap and as a bug comment.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
Cool. Moving on, pod conditions around readiness to start container after completion of pods and box creation. This one is merged as alpha 2.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, yeah, that one is good to go. The one thing I had to do was the original author wasn't able to get a hold of him, so I had to kind of create a new ticket to track this and get this more up to date. So hopefully I kept this one in a more better state.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay, moving on. Improve multi-NUMA alignment in topology manager. This one is promoting to beta, and it is merged in 128. And the next one, well, this is my cap. Limit on parallel image pool is trying to be promoted to beta, and it is not merged. I didn't get the time to write the test. There is some change on my schedule. So yeah, that's that. I'll try to do it in the next cycle.
I think for this, we have documentation change that accidentally got merged. We need to revert that.
What change?
Documentation change on our
Oh,
website.
okay.
Thank you.
And the next one is, oh, sorry, let me just document change. Okay. Next one is the node memory swap support is promoting to beta 1, and it is merged. And then sidecar containers is there are some changes, but it's still still alpha, and the changes merged. The next one, supervisorly CRI full container pod status is trying to be promoted to beta, and it's not merged in 128. And then fine-grained supplemental groups control, yeah, attempting alpha again, not merged. Next one, retriable, non-retriable pod failures for jobs is some changes, but still staying in beta, and it is merged. And then in-place update for pod resources is staying in alpha for 128, and I don't think there's any change merged for it. I might be wrong on the status of this one. Okay,
Yeah, we wanted to support Windows for that, but we failed to merge that.
Okay. Okay, next one, CDI devices to device plugin API, alpha, and it is merged. And then split standard out and standard error log stream. This is not merged. I don't think the author made too many comments or too many updates on the issue, but yeah, it looks like there is just a not too much recent update. And next one is ensure secret put images. Yeah, target and alpha, and it is not merged. And then introducing sleep action for pre-stop hook, target and alpha, and not merged. And then discover C group driver from CRI, alpha launch, and merged. And the next one is support for dropping kubelet configuration, alpha launch, new feature, and it is merged. Next one is the decouple TIN manager from no lifecycle controller, target and alpha, new feature, and is not merged. Next one is field status host IP, add a new field host IPs for pod, target and alpha, and it's merged. The next one is also a new field max restart times. This is also alpha and it's not merged. Next one, cloud dual stack node IP handling. Yeah, targeting beta and it's not merged. The next one is graduate kubelet pod resources endpoint to GA. I think this is an old beta feature and it's targeting stable and it is merged for 128. The next one is, well, this is more of a policy change to support oldest node with newest control plane. Yeah, and it's merged. Right, the next one, extend pod resources API to report allocatable resources, also the long-standing feature to be promoted to stable and is merged. And next one is non-graceful node shutdown, promoting to stable and is merged. And the next one, configurable grace period to probes, trying to be promoted to stable and is not merged.
I actually think this did merge.
I'm sorry, which one?
Yeah, I think it was G8. Yeah.
Yeah, this one GA, the grace period seconds.
This one is merged or not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it is merged, okay.
Yeah, I need to do a doc change for it.
All right, cool, thanks. Yeah, and the next one, DRA, dynamic resource allocation, alpha, and I think the changes are merged. Yeah, and the next one is to support third-party device monitoring plugins. This is also a long-standing feature being promoted to stable, and it is merged. Next one, kubelet resource metrics endpoint, also promoting to stable. And this one is not merged. And the next one is sub-second, more granular probes, new feature alpha, not merged. And the last one is QoS class resources, also alpha, new feature, and it's not merged. So yeah, these are all the 31 caps we tracked for 128. And so we have actually 17 of them merged. Okay, and yeah, to compare, these are some of the history data. We had way more caps tracked in 128 compared to previous cycles. Okay, so with that, let's go to the retro part. Yeah. How do we want to do this? We can take a quick look of what we found out in the previous retro for 127, and then maybe we can think if we have achieved them in 128. So this is what we found out in the 127 retro, things that went well. We did in-place pod vertical scaling. We had some good progress on graduations, cap graduations. And yeah, in 127, we had more caps tracked and merged, and now we have even more caps tracked. Better overall planning, everything goes on time. Did a good job applying milestones. And yeah, we had more chairs. And yeah, we decided to not take sidecar for 127. And for in place, we decided to not block on window support. Cap reviews, we did that earlier. And we identified issues through tests before releasing. Things could have gone better in 127, merged in place late due to the reviews and some bugs. And not too much going on for fixing the in-place bugs. Right, and we broke a standalone kubelet. Yeah, and also we did most of the reviews right before the freeze. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we found out in 127. So let's talk about 128 then.
If you're talking about what could have gone better, we still not very good in merging early. So sidecar is an example when we wanted to merge as early as possible and we were ready, but we merged very late in the result.
Was that a function of reviews?
Both reviews actually revealed something, but we only get good reviews closer to the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
You said only got good reviews close to.
Okay, anything we did good for the last cycle? Trying to think. Well, this is we tracked more caps than before. I think this is the most caps we have ever tracked for a single cycle. I'm not 100% sure if that's like a totally good thing or not, but I just want to mention that in the things that went well part.
I think probably we should look at the ratio, right? So when
Yeah.
we track more,
Yeah, that
percentage completion is less. I think the last one percentage completion was pretty high, like 13 out of 19, and this is 17 out of 31.
Yeah.
And we get spread too thin, I think.
But at the same time, we need to look also at the size of the caps. So many of those emerged as the small and straightforward ones.
Yeah.
And most of the big ones will just postpone it.
Right. I think like we have capacity for only one or two big ones. So I think sidecar was the big one that we got in this time. So we need to identify early which big ones we can take.
Which is good one. Reasonably big.
For one or two.
Number of caps is a function of better planning. So we guide people more on how to get things into release, but then during the release, we don't have as much review power.
But that actually repetition of what was on previous, like what we can do better. So we can use the time between the releases to do the reviews for those which will not fit into previous ones. So like not to postpone it until the last moment.
One area I think we struggle, and maybe this goes back to the big ones comment, or maybe what you're alluding to here, is some of the caps I think that we present are not, they present a big idea and maybe they have like 80% of the idea thought through, and I think we struggle to get a broader set of folks engaged in helping to flesh out that final 20%. I think we're all pretty strapped in that area, and I think that's where we seem to break down a little bit. Like the more the idea is presented and covers all the use cases, the better we are in reviewing and closing it. But helping close those gaps in ideas that are presented, I think can cause some friction between people who want a big item and those who are trying to make sure the thing is, I guess, as baked as possible. But I don't know if I'm alone in that perspective, but I don't know if that's also what you're alluding to.
No, I was just referring to what was written in the previous retrospecting. So, like most of the reviews are done in short period of time, just before the deadline, and practically before. Well, we have more time between the code is complete and the deadline for new caps.
Yeah, and part of the reason on the human factor, I think, on why some other reviews are done near the end is because folks are trying to think through how to help present a pathway to close the 20% that could be missing in something, or you know, the chicken and egg scenario. Sometimes they get presented in like bootstrapping problems, but versus everyone having the time to maybe collaborate on big ideas at a faster cadence, or what. I know personally I struggle with that. I don't know if I'm the only one. So I know there's a few others that we read some caps in, we're thinking what to do on this, and there's probably some guilt on trying to figure out how to close some questions. And sometimes the caps present things as alpha and then defer the resolution of the big problems until beta. And I don't know, personally, I don't like that. So yeah, just food for thought.
I think deadline also acts as a motivating factor that if we don't review it, we have only a week left. So that's when everyone gets lit up to go and review and try to get things merged. I don't know, like what other I think we need to come up with other motivating factors to kind of spread that reviews out across caps.
There's also a little bit of a bleed that happens where you could split up certain caps into parts, and we don't, because we're looking for to boil the ocean a little bit too much, maybe, or at least we have different opinions on what that would be.
Yeah, I think we are generally good if the problem is well understood and scoped and contained, and we are able to move faster. I'm not sure if it's always possible to take a new idea and break it down cleanly that way.
Yeah, it almost feels like for some of the caps, we need a different track, an architecture track where we're deciding what the total contents should be, the end game, and and then the parts, so that we can make progress moving forward, right? I think sometimes we're too concerned about putting something in that we have to support forever, but even if it's just an alpha. Just a thought.
Do you know things that went well?
I would like to call out that the QoS testing was pretty good. It caught an issue in time, and we were able to pause the move to beta. So while we didn't go to beta, I think it's a good thing we caught it with the testing, the memory QoS.
Can I ask a question on that? And I want to make sure I was understanding. Was the behavior of memory.high what was actually expected by the kernel community, or was that a bug in the kernel community and memory.high will match to what we actually had thought it meant, which was you'd be throttled but not fully stopped?
So I think when memory.high was launched, the documentation was incomplete. And then eventually there were a lot of people who had questions around the usage of memory.high. And that's when it was clarified by the kernel folks, I would say. So memory.high can essentially be used to throttle the workloads, but there needs to be an external workload that should react to the throttling. Basically, say it can be used in a feedback loop mechanism. Basically, when the workloads are throttled, there needs to be an external something external that takes care of either moving memory.high to a higher level and sort of help in increasing the resources that the workloads would need. Does that make sense?
Okay, so it basically the expectation is memory.high should halt your process, but then because you're halted, you can increase it and control the knob at that level, or you could have written your own killer to do an action at that time.
That's correct. That's correct. So I was thinking maybe when we have our user space killing in place, maybe then we can use it. But yeah, it cannot be used for just throttling.
And then nothing when reaching memory.high is inducing memory reclaim by the kernel at that time, or is it still trying to do, like, is there memory pressure before you get to memory.high?
I did not check whether there was memory pressure before memory.high, but yes, there was memory pressure after it reached memory.high, and there were kernel reclaims beyond that point, but it never reached the memory.max level that would have resulted in kills. It always stayed below memory.max. That's why it was just stuck.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that detail. I know there's other issues that at least here with my Red Hat on, where I would foresee us, as we try to start using more Secrets v2 features, like the Cube community finding maybe the unexpected with the behavior in the core C groups or vice versa. I know there's an issue right now around maybe some CPU set behaviors that we're trying to think through ourselves. So maybe this is a good role model on just the importance of testing. So I agree with Mernal.
Yeah, I think we'll need something like UMD integration here for this to be more useful. And I think, as Dikshita pointed out, right, the clarification in the kernel documentation only happened like a month or two when people started asking more questions about the behavior. So even within the kernel community, it seems like not everyone was on the same page on how this behaved.
So as one of the action items, do we want to try postponing and rejecting more caps next cycle unless we have clear approver committed to that? Like right now we list approvers, but those approvers may not necessarily track implementation and give early feedback.
This is part of the planning, right? During planning, we should reject more caps unless they have clear.
I'm asking if we want to do that. So if there is a reviewer and approver who clearly committed to spend time early in the cycle to review caps, PRs, we cannot accept anything. Would it help or would it make it worse? we may end up with very few caps because approver powers is very little.
I also think it's worth asking though, Sergey, if we can expand approver powers after this release as a separate action item. I don't know if there's any interest in folks looking to help expand the roster there. But I think anything we do to improve like the social contract for people is a good thing.
Okay, maybe at least we can list reviewers and approvers really explicit next cycle. So we take it as a little bit of just like put any name if nobody committed. Like I see Brunel name very often in the approvers list if nobody else sign up to review. But maybe we need to be more explicit there.
I think we also need a reviewer, right? So not just more approver.
Yeah, absolutely. Reviewers and approvers.
I also find myself wondering, like, what is the definition of success here with, like, you know, the object of trying to reject caps unless they have clear approvers implies that, like, our success metrics are planning the amount that we feel like we can take on. But also I would consider, like, you know, 17 caps in a cycle is like, or what is the number? Whatever the number is, I've lost it. Is like really good and kind of like the best that we've done. And if we had been more conservative, we might not have been able to get that much done, right? So like, is it necessarily that bad of a thing for us to have the ratio bad, or is it, you know, how do we want to define success here?
I agree. I think we did a good job this cycle, and we track more. Ratio might be dropped, but look at how much we merge and how much make progress. I still think team community here actually did a good job. And I really worry about it just for the velocity become to the big driving here, and then destable our quality. I mean, Kubernetes SIG Node owns so many components, already have the reliability issues, right? Everyone heard that, and then we are rushing for velocity.
So if the goal is to try to maybe track fewer things and get a closer, you know, batting average between merged and tracked, then
yeah,
I think it's good. But I agree with you know, everyone here that 17 is a pretty good number. Like I feel good about that.
Getting a lot of background.
We will not try to enforce it, or we'll just be more explicit on when calling approvers. Yeah, I kind of agree. Like that's why I asked, like, will it hurt more or will it help to have clear approvers and reviewers?
Well, I think to the point here Commander was making, Peter, I think we've got two things going on, right? There's two goals. One goal is to have a long-term support, very stable release, and another goal is to have all these, you know, great new features and that we think are important for future releases. And because we're only, you know, really having one main release, we're not doing any, you know, out front experimental releases, and we don't have a LTS release per se. I think because of that, we've got this like pulling back and forth between what people want to get in and you know, what is actually ready and stable, right? If you don't merge something, you can't really test it very well. And we have feature gates to try to alleviate that, but we're holding out a lot of alphas with feature gate default offs, just, you know, out of risk, right?
I think the risk is still very good, like very big. We still have at least 2 alpha features from 1.10 and 1.12 releases, which are not being looked at, and nobody wants to either remove or continue with those. There may be a accumulated tech debt to accept more features. I think another point, arguing with myself, like we will start rejecting more caps and concentrate on fewer caps. We may end up in a wrong incentive here when we accepted cap and we try to force ourselves to merge it no matter what, because we already made a big commitment, and even if we see a big problem with that, we still trying to merge it because there is nothing else in the pipeline because we rejected everything else. I think incentive may be a little bit off if we'll start doing that.
Well, Sergey, what actually can be handled probably? So, like, imagine we made a commitment to do something, like we purpose merge it, but when during the implementation we figured out what it's not what we want. So we can revert the cap merge and put it back to under review.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think incentive will be to merge it, even if there is a problem that you may not fully be comfortable with. So you can force yourself to be comfortable with that because there is nothing else in the pipeline and you want release to be meaningful. So incentive a little bit slight, like a little bit off here.
Yeah, that's another reason I kind of feel like the definition of success thing is important to define is like, you know, you mentioned we have our features that are, you know, have been stuck since like 1.10 or 1.12 or whatever. Like if we reduce the set of things that we aim to work on, like the life cycle of the caps that we've already kind of committed to will extend because we have, you know, this set of caps that we've already agreed to work on. But if we cut down the number, then like those could maybe not make progress in a way that like over time will kind of lead us to having perma betas and having, you know, things kind of languishing in alpha. So I wonder if like really what we should be aiming for is, you know, merged caps, like, you know, merged like little pieces of work that incrementally move on, kind of like what Mike was talking about. You know, our small little changes over time, taking off like not more than we can chew per little change, but like aiming to take on those as many of those little changes as possible, because those can like don't as much threaten the stability of the code base, but also like have little improvements over time.
There are more ideas and opinions on either metrics of success or what went good or bad.
Excuse me, this is Kevin. I think one thing that was confusing for me was if there's no owner on the issue or they're hard to get a hold of, it was not clear to me like what the progress is for that. And I noticed as I was working on the KEP, having your KEP issue up to date really helps the release team actually know what's going on. So towards the end of this release, I just ended up basically copying the issue and getting it up to date, and that made honestly stuff a lot clearer. But I guess like an action item is making sure that the KEP posting owner is available, because one of the issues I found is if the person that creates the issue is only able to edit it, and that was kind of a little bit of an annoying one.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was encountered with swap as well.
Yeah, I tried to ask the GitHub admins or whoever, whatever the organization is called, to see if there was an option, and it really was just the owner of the KEP should be, the owner of the issue should be at least involved. Otherwise, you will have to kind of create a new issue.
Yeah, I think I, as a chair, has a permission to edit issues, so I try to keep them up to date, especially if there is a comment in the issue asking for that. But I agree, like if it's not scaling that well, so maybe some automation may help here as well.
Yeah, I didn't even know. I asked on the SIG Node channel, and then I was told that the only way to do that is to create a new issue. I didn't know who had access to those issues. But yeah, it's probably better to make sure the issue owner is actually creating it, because it is crucial to the release team of knowing what steps are there. And yeah, there are a few items there that I think are important to keep up to date.
Couple of items I thought went really well. One, the refactoring of infra on the CNCF host. I thought that went surprisingly well. The other that I thought went really well this release, more so than prior releases, was all of this help the SIG Node team has been doing to push down dependency requirements to the container runtimes and runtime engines. A little bit of a shout out. You guys did a great job, helping push us to get the changes we need in the runtimes and engines, sufficiently done for your features. For example, the whole stuff around, user namespace with ID mapping and volumes. I thought that went really well. Even though we don't have a run C release yet, the issue, I thought that the effort was there.
Mike, did I capture that correctly? It's a refactor of CNCF?
The refactoring, sorry about the puppies. The refactoring of test infra for Prowl. Oh, it was moved to CNCF. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm babysitting a puppy today.
Okay, if there is no more opinions and things to share, I think action item would be to better understand what our goal is, and better planning would be interesting challenge. Like we need to be careful of how much things we commit to and how many things we want to take a release.
Yep. All right. So that is the retro for 128. I will organize my notes a little bit after this. Okay. I will hand it over back to Sergey.
Thank you, Raven. We have two more items on the agenda today. First is Peter.
Yeah, speaking of taking on more things and features and stuff, there's a couple of, what was it, weeks ago, I don't know, sometime in the past, right at the beginning of the 128 cycle, we're talking a little bit about, some reworking of kubelet image GC. It's kind of been a longstanding idea that people had to have different schemes. There's two kind of priorities that, putting my red hat on, there's two kind of priorities that we kind of have in related to the kubelet GC, and I wanted to see if other people had other sort of perspectives. So like one of the things that we want to push for is alternate schemes for like garbage collection. Right now, part of it is just disk percentage space. I think we have a use case where it would also be useful to have some sort of like time-based garbage collection, which kind of implies the existence of maybe a plugin system, which could overcomplicate things depending if there's like no one else with other kind of ideas, but also if other people have sort of garbage collection schemes that they can imagine they would want, like maybe we could. So I'd like to in part discuss that. And then there's like a separate one, which is we'd like to be able to separate basically the way that the images are mounted, or the images are mounted to create the containers, to separate the image store, which we're like also calling the read-only layer, from the like writable layer, separate disks, so that we can have a separately mounted image disk. And I met with Derek and some folks in Red Hat internally yesterday, and it sounds like that second use case might actually be possible, but there might be a couple of things that the kubelet is assuming about the way that the containers are mounted that will not actually be the case. So those are like, we're going to investigate that second case. That's kind of like a separate, they're two kind of separate but related things, and I think they'll end up ultimately being two different KEPs, but I wanted to surface them both because they're both kind of related to each other. Beginning for the first question, like for the image garbage collection schemes, like are there other use cases that people have thought of, that people are looking for with like, you know, cleaning up the images? Are there other ways that, other triggers that people want to kind of see happen in the kubelet for starting the garbage collection process?
There's definitely
One thing
oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I'm sorry, just one thing we're looking for is to pin some images to protect them from being garbage collected by kubelet. We can do this already on the container runtime side. We have that pin flag. It's just if we have a more I don't know, systematic way to do this, that will be better. Just one.
Yeah, and kind of the scope of the container runtime piece is more like, I want to reserve images that I care about as the runtime. That's less of like I'm a user and I want to define like these sets of images are ones that I just never want to garbage collect. Like those are, I mean, you can achieve it with that, but like as in terms of like an exposable API, for instance, that would, it's like they're kind of different use cases. So I can't imagine that would, if we came up with a plugin scheme, then we could tie in that sort of use case in there, but it could be like a plugin system that ignores certain images and just doesn't remove them.
Derek brings up a good point in the chat. Some of these policy things need to be multi-tenant based, or isolate that one user is only allowed to access this private pulled image. We can't. And that's part of that ensured secret pulled image stuff we're working on. But without the policy, it's sort of hard to, to match that to the runtime handlers and the pod specs. We're sort of guessing a little bit too much. If we had the right policy definitions for security and for caching, performance purposes, then we could do that. We also have a use case that's specific so far just to Containerd. Because of our snapshotters, we can set them on a handler basis, and we might be using a different file system. And we're finding that the status of an image is right now isolated only to a default file system, not to the actual file system where it's unpacked. Okay, so we definitely have some issues there with respect to, is the cache policy going to be, pull just the zipped images, and then the unpack can go on into end file systems. It can get really detailed, right? But if we have the right kind of cache policies in the pod spec, I think Peter, we can solve at least the program perspective at kubelet.
So I appreciate you chiming in there, Mike. You were who I was hoping to induce. One of the things I wasn't sure when you were pushing for, ensure secret pooled images can't be, or always re-entitled, I guess, or revalidated when already cached on node, was if you had,
we're going with the flush access pretty quick.
Yeah. What I was
what we really
mostly
know.
trying to think through is if you had heard any, for those who are using Kubernetes in like maybe highly regulated environments or like different compliance environments, if anyone has had a requirement that says, this pod that's using this secret pooled image, the secret pooled image must be garbage collected or shared the same fate as the pod. Like, does the life cycle of the application image need to match the life cycle of the runtime itself? So
yes, the answer is yes. But we're solving it with, by pulling it into a different kind of VM as opposed to having it, in the local host cache.
okay, but the point being, like, you folks have heard requirements around image GC or when it should be done or not done, and if that image was entitled or not, where the policies might vary or need to vary. Whether or not everyone's taking different implementation approaches, that's cool, that's fine.
Yes, confidential containers, we had the requirement what image should be dropped as soon as the confidential stuff is destroyed. So we put destroyed.
So you're on it, Derek. If we have the right policy set, as per Peter was talking about, then we could also cover multi-tenancy issues with respect to the security, right? In that policy for the, for caching policy. And then you could pass that down to the runtime and we could go ahead and clean it up, right? Right now, the garbage collection is done by kubelet. Maybe that's the right place, but I'm not sure yet. I'm not convinced. I think for two reasons. One, the security information needs to be kept inviolate, right? We shouldn't be passing secrets down the credits over the APIs. I don't think. We should probably come up with a cache policy that says use, resolver level key rings only. And then kubelet would know, okay, I'm not going to try to use the old model of using image pool secrets, right? So that's one part of the security thing we need to clean up. The other part is yes, if you pulled it from one person, you have to pull always if you're in a multi-tenant scenario today, and we can fix that, but it's going to require some more work on that ensured pool secrets cap. Thanks.
Yeah, for the same vein of discussions, for one of the things we discussed internally, I wanted to entertain an idea if we can put mirrors config into kubelet. Like, do we have to have mirrors config in runtime? So one of the reasons for mirrors config, like the problem with mirrors config in the runtime, if you have pool secret for specific mirrors that you use, you maybe want to use this pool secret when you use this mirror, especially if it's some kind of ambient pool secret from in Google examples, GCR.io. Like you may want to use your ambient secret to use with GCR.io if it's configured as a mirror for specific image or like specific registry. And there are other use cases that may be useful, like if you can reuse certain images and stuff like that. And also it will be useful for end users because like they don't need to learn how to configure mirrors in different environments and different runtimes. And the logic is very much the same across different runtimes. So it may be just worth to migrate all the logic to kubelet and make runtime slimmer and more efficient. Like more like
you're thinking put more registry mirror routing information in pod spec as opposed to less, and passing the policy for pulling the image down to the runtime. It could go both ways, but then are you really wanting kubelet to do the resolve and the pull and then push it into a location for the container runtime to use?
No, API will be definitely more elaborate between kubelet and runtime.
Okay.
Is there any ideas, like immediate knee-jerk reactions on that?
Well, I wonder, like, kind of a pattern that we've been leaning into, but not necessarily like committing to, is like the opposite direction, where we're moving more housekeeping knowledge into the runtime instead of the other way around. And the motivation being the runtime is the one that's ultimately responsible for those operations. So it's like, closest to, it knows about, the confidential VMs in a way that the kubelet will like probably never be taught how to know, or like it's not in the scope of those enhancements. I wonder, I do agree that it's awkward right now that basically the way that you have to do mirroring in the runtime is you basically lie to the kubelet and say like, haha, like you asked me to pull this image, but I'm just going to ignore you and do something different. So like reconciling that sort of like weird like sleight of hand would be good, but I'm not sure. I think talking through the details of like who's ultimately responsible for that, I think would be, I think we might need to do some more discussion on that.
Yeah, it's a tricky problem.
Well, user interface of fetching the secret and passing it down to runtime, or like mirror configuration and passing it down to runtime, it's probably solvable. It's not a big deal. But like moving to kubelet logic of how images should be fetched, or like when teaching like different runtime handlers, what is the specifics to kubelet, it's not really good one, in my opinion.
And to outline why this is important, this is only going to get more complicated and more urgent as we start doing artifact support for scan results, or signatures, SBOMs, requirements that you're going to need to have in the pod spec. I think going forward, right? That require all images have been signed. You can do that with plugins, but again, it's getting more and more complicated. How do we deal with the images? It's probably time to do a work group on pod spec definitions for caching, for images, artifacts, routing, mirroring, all this sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and I think it's especially complicated because we have the split brain mode, where like currently kubelet is aware of half of the things and telling the CRI the things it knows, and then the CRI is either listening or not, depending on like how obscure the configuration is. And that I think we're really good. Like with these kinds of more obscure use cases, we're going to just keep hitting these walls of like who is actually responsible, like why, like who is the entity that should actually know about this and who should just follow along. We're coming up against time. I am wondering, part of my wanting to bring this up was just to see like who's thinking about this. Does anyone want to be involved in the conversation? It sounds like yes. The second question would be like, what is the appropriate forum to continue this conversation? Should we have a working group that is talking about it, or should we like just continue in the, this meeting for a little bit until it seems appropriate? This is something that we want to, like we as, like my team at Red Hat wants to like pursue the garbage collection piece at least in 129, but I want to make sure all the other voices are heard. Should we set up a separate meeting, or should we just reconvene next week and, see if we can, come up with a sort of direction, maybe with a proposal that's written out a little more concretely?
What worked well with Sidecar is separate meeting, at least for a while, to distribute tasks to write documents. And once we have more written down, it's easier to bring it to bigger forum.
Right. Okay, well, I can investigate sort of starting at least like a working group in the intermediate time between like now and when we have to start thinking about KEP process, so that we can have larger discussions like this and kind of fine tune all of our thoughts before bringing it to the larger forum.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
As a last item, I wanted to remind that sidecar working group is happening. We post meetings for the code freeze, but we will restart them starting next week. It's 9 a.m. just hour before this meeting. If you're interested in sidecars evolution, please join that meeting. And with that, we reached the end of agenda. Is there any last minute notes, exclaimers? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Raven, again for driving the retrospective. Bye-bye.